and welcome back. So today's video is going to be all about fractions. Fractions is something that we use all the time in our lives, but when we do it at school, sometimes children find it a bit confusing because it's actually quite an abstract concept. And so I'm hopefully going to be able to shed some light on what they are, which is what I'm looking at today. And then I'll show you some of the things over the next few videos that we would do with fractions in school, like comparing them, ordering them, adding and subtracting, and all sorts of things like that. I'll show you some of the methods we use in school, and hopefully it will make it a bit clearer when it comes to doing some homework with your children. So, fractions. Very simply, fractions are part of a whole. So for example, I could say that Wiltshire is part of the UK. Wiltshire's a part, the UK is the whole. The hand is part of a whole body. A slice is part of the whole loaf. When we're talking about it in maths, we need to be slightly more specific than that. It's not just any old part, it's an equal part of the whole. So in these examples here, you might be able to see which are split equally and which are not. Division is a really important part of fractions, which I'll touch on at the end. Fractions are all about division. It's all about splitting things equally, which is exactly what division is. So if I look at these two examples in the middle, this triangle and this circle, they are split into equal parts. Every piece is the same size. If I look at this circle and this triangle, those parts are not equal, so they wouldn't be used as fractions. I can also do it with amounts. So I might say that I could divide the number 6 into two equal groups of 3. So I could divide it equally into 2 lots of 3. It's the same sort of thing, and it's useful in real life. So, you might have £6 and you might want to split that into 2. When we talk about fractions then, we need to use the right terminology with the children. And although the words are quite large words, they are words that the children find quite easy to pick up. So don't be afraid to use them with them and expect to hear them from your children. So the denominator then is the first one. That is the number of equal parts that we're splitting the whole into. So if I've got a pizza and I'm sharing it between 2 people, I'm dividing it or splitting it into 2 equal pieces. The numerator then is how many parts we're using. So each person would get 1 of those pieces. So 1 out of 2, 1/2. Maybe I have something like £3 and I'd be dividing my 3 into 3 equal pieces and giving one person 1 of those pieces each, so they'd each have 1/3 of my amount. Or maybe I've got a pie and I'm cutting 5 slices, that would be my denominator. I'm cutting it into 5 pieces and I am feeling greedy and want to eat 3 of them. That's how many parts I'm using. So that's the first thing that children need to know about fractions. They should then be able to name fractions when they see them in pictures like this. So they should be able to look at this and say, well, the denominator is 4 because this square is split into 1, 2, 3, 4 pieces. And the numerator is 1 because 1 is coloured. They would probably call that 1/4, but of course it's actually 1/4. So just make sure they're using the right terminology there. Similar thing here, but this time it's only got 1, 2, 3 pieces that it's split into, and 1 is coloured again, so this time it's 1/3. Over here we've got 1, 2, 3, 4, so we're into quarters again. Now you could look at the red or the white. You could say that if you were looking at the white, that would be 3/4, but perhaps you're looking at the red, so the red would be 1/4. And then this one, altogether there's 16 triangles. I'll save you the trouble of counting. And 2 of them are coloured. So that would be what we call a non-unit fraction. It's got something other than a 1 as a numerator. We'll come back to those in the future. But this non-unit fraction, 2/16, is shown in this way. All of those pieces are equal, and so the denominator is how many parts each is split into. The numerator is how many parts of that we're using. Children might notice that 2/16 could actually be the same as 1/8. If they bring that up, brilliant, have that discussion, but that is something that we'll actually look at properly in the future. When I was at school, we often used models like this and images like this. We'd often use circles to show our fractions. That's really helpful in lots of ways in real life because we often talk about fractions as dividing things up because that's how we would use it in real life, like cutting up a pizza, dividing up a cake or something like that. So circles make sense in that respect. However, to actually do maths with them, they're not very useful. They're really hard to draw freehand. almost impossible really. And they're not very good for comparing either, which is a really important thing in fractions. So for example, it's not necessarily obvious in these two pictures that 1/3 is the same as 2/6. Some people might see it, but others wouldn't. So fractions are not always best represented in circles. Ways that we would do it then at school at the moment, which work a little bit better, are things like this. This is a fraction wall. It's really good for looking at how fractions relate to each other. So we could see that 1/4 is equivalent to 2/8, or things like that. Or 12/12 is exactly the same as 1 whole. Again, I'll come back to comparing fractions more in the future. These, though, are what I want to show you, because these are going to come up lots when your children are learning about fractions. They are bar models. They're really coming into education a lot lately. They're really helpful in lots of different ways, not just fractions, but they are really great for fractions. I can do lots of different things with them. So on a basic level, I can just find fractions of numbers. So for example, this bar shows 8 squares, and I've coloured in half of those. 1/2 of 8 is 4. Same again here, but this time I've got quarters, and I've got 1/4 coloured. Or in this one, 3/4 coloured. They're really useful for things like that. I'll show you more about how to use them to add and subtract fractions in the future. We can use them to compare as well. We might say, which of these is larger? Is it 3/4 of a fraction, or is it 2/3 of a fraction? And we can see it visually that the 3/4 is a larger slice or a larger chunk than just 2/3. Again, we'll look at comparison more in another video. But I just wanted to introduce you to bar models because they are really, really useful, and definitely most people find them easier to draw and easier to compare and understand than these circles, even though these circles might be a bit more familiar to us. So I said earlier that children would need to be able to have a look and understand the relationship between fractions and division. So very simply, and this is quite mind-blowing to many adults, the division sign is actually a fraction, but with the numbers blanked out. And this is how it works. If I was splitting one thing between two, I'd end up with a half. So for example, one cake split between two, each person would get half. Or maybe I might have one object split between three. So maybe one pie split between three, each person would get a third. Or one split between 5, £1 split between 5 people, they'd each get 1/5. So the number, the numerator, the number at the top, split between the number at the bottom is our fraction. I don't introduce this to children at the very beginning, but it's quite an interesting thinking point. And it's quite interesting because most adults haven't made that connection before. We might have seen fractions, we might have seen division written in this way if we were doing equations, maybe, GCSE maths or higher. You might write it like this. To put something over something else means to divide it. And that's just what's happening here. So another example, maybe you've got 3 cakes. If you divide those between 4 people, they'll each get 3/4. So not an essential link to know when they first start learning, but children do find that quite interesting. And so once they're ready, make that connection with them, because fractions and division just go absolutely hand in hand. So to summarise, what are fractions? They are equal parts of a whole. One whole split into different parts. The denominator is how many parts that thing is split into. The numerator is how many parts we're using. Have a go at some bar modelling. It's a really useful tool. I can't overemphasise just how much it comes into using fractions at school. So if you've never seen it before, do have a look at it and get to grips with it a bit more. So there we are. That was just a really quick whistle-stop tour into the basics and foundations of what fractions are. Hopefully that has helped a bit. When I do future videos, like I said, I'll look at some other things to do with fractions. And if there's anything, as always, that you would like me to look at, whether it's to do with maths or any other subject, please just drop me a line and let me know. You can find me on YouTube here. You can get me on Facebook or Instagram at Mrs. A Homework. So please do get in touch if there's anything in particular that you want videos on, because I'll always try to help. Thank you.